When you hear the name Manson, images of cult-like devotion and shocking violence immediately spring to mind. But what if I told you that the Manson family's notorious legacy pales in comparison to some lesser-known clans? Prepare to delve into the dark, disturbing world of families whose actions defy belief and morality. From multi-generational serial killers to incestuous cults, these real-life horror stories will make you question the very fabric of familial bonds. Brace yourself for a chilling journey into the hearts of darkness that once beat beneath the guise of ordinary households.
Starting off today, we are talking about the Harp brothers. Micah Big Harp and Wiley Little Harp were notorious outlaws who roamed the American frontier in the late 18th century, earning the grim title of America's first documented serial killers. These brothers were a brutal duo who left a bloody trail across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois, claiming the lives of at least 39 people. Their crimes weren't just about the body count, they took a very dark pleasure in the cruelty of their methods, often harming their victims in ways that sent shockwaves of horror through the communities they terrorized. Beyond their savage crimes, the Harps were also known for their thievery and for setting fires to cover their tracks or create diversions. Their reign of terror came to a gruesome end when they were finally captured, but their tales of brutality lived on, painting them as a sort of boogeyman of the early American wilderness. Next, we are talking about the Gonzalez sisters. Delfina and Maria were infamous figures in Mexico during the 1950s and 1960s, not just for running a large sex work ring, but for the terrifying manner in which they managed their illicit business. These sisters turned their ranch into a nightmarish hub of criminal activity where they lured countless young women with promises of legitimate jobs, only to force them into a life of darkness and crime. The depths of their cruelty didn't stop there. The sisters were notoriously brutal, punishing and sometimes killing the women over minor infractions or when they became too ill or too old to work. They also didn't hesitate to eliminate any clients who crossed them or knew too much, but by the time the authorities caught up with them, it was revealed that their reign of terror resulted in the deaths of at least 91 people. Next, we are moving on to the Shelton Brothers gang. Led by the notorious trio of Carl, Earl, and Bernie Shelton, they were a force to be reckoned with in southern Illinois during the Prohibition era. These brothers turned bootlegging into an art form, running illegal alcohol with a mix of charm and brute force. They didn't just stop at smuggling hooch, they expanded their empire into gambling and weren't shy about knocking out the competition, literally. Their battles with rival gangs were like the stuff of legend, featuring high-octane shootouts and dramatic bombings, but the Sheltons were also very savvy political operators. They knew that a little influence could go a long way, so they cozied up to local politicians to shield their operations from the law. Whether it was bribing officials or intimidating enemies, they had a hand in shaping the political landscape to suit their needs. Their blend of criminal cunning and entrepreneurial spirit made them a powerhouse during one of America's most tumultuous times, and their legacy is a wild chapter in the history of the American Midwest's underworld. Next, we are talking about the DeMeo crew, an infamous arm of the Gambino Mafia family. They were the epitome of ruthless efficiency in New York City's underworld during the 1970s and the 1980s. Led by the notorious Roy DeMeo, this gang was feared for their brutal tactics and cold-blooded efficiency. They weren't just your average mobsters. These guys turned crime into a gruesome art form, specializing in a method they dubbed the Gemini method, which involved taking the lives of their victims, then systematically dismembering them to dispose of the bodies more effectively. Unsettling. It's believed they were responsible for up to 100 of these gruesome crimes, leaving a trail of terror across the city. Their operations weren't limited to eliminating rivals or unfortunate snitches. They dipped their bloody hands into various mafia enterprises, from car theft rings known as the Car Theft theft capital of the world to substance trafficking and loan sharking. Next, we are talking about the Sackler family, owners of Purdue Pharma. They are often seen as the face of the opioid crisis that has ravaged communities across the United States. They made their fortune from OxyContin, a powerful painkiller that became a blockbuster drug thanks to aggressive marketing and sales tactics. Despite its effectiveness for pain relief, OxyContin also became infamous for its addictive qualities, a fact that many accuse the Sacklers of deliberately downplaying to boost sales. As the death toll from opioid overdoses soared into the hundreds of thousands, the family found themselves in hot water, facing a barrage of lawsuits from states, cities, and individuals claiming Purdue Pharma's practices contributed significantly to the epidemic. The Sacklers saga is a very complex mix of medical innovation, corporate greed, and a public health disaster, leaving a legacy mired in controversy and a nation grappling with the consequences of addiction. Next, we are talking about the Duvalier family, led first by Francois Papa Doc and then led by his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc. They dominated Haiti from 1957 to 1986, and their reign was nothing short of a horror movie come to life. Papa Doc, a former doctor turned dictator, used his private militia, the Tonton Macoute, as a tool of terror. These guys were aptly named after a boogeyman from Haitian folklore, but their horror was unfortunately very real. They enforced Papa Doc's rule through torment, kidnappings, and the disappearance of anyone who whispered a word of dissent. When Papa Doc passed away, his son Baby Doc took over and the nightmare continued. Under their rule, Haiti was stripped of its wealth, with the Duvaliers living large while the country plunged into poverty and chaos. Their legacy? A lasting shadow of fear and corruption that still darkens Haitian politics. It's a stark reminder of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, leaving a nation to collect the pieces long after they were gone. Next, we are talking about the Rajneesh family, or the followers of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who later rebranded himself as Osho. They were more like a tight-knit cult than a traditional family. In the early 1980s, this group set up a commune called Rajneesh Puram in the wilds of Oregon, creating a mini-city complete with its own airport, malls, and police force. Their goal? To live out the spiritual leader's vision of a utopian society. However, of course, things took a dark turn when they attempted to take over the local government in Wasco County. Under the directive of Ma Anand Sheila, Osho's fiery personal secretary, the Rajneeshis hatched a plan to win a county election by incapacitating the local voter base. In a shocking move, they spread salmonella bacteria on salad bars in 10 local restaurants, sickening over 750 people in one of the largest bioterror attacks in US history. But their scheming didn't stop at biological warfare. I guess that just wasn't enough. They were also caught engaging in a slew of other illegal activities, including immigration fraud, wiretapping, and even plotting assassinations to silence their critics. Next, we are talking about the Moran family. They were central figures in the gritty and blood-soaked drama of Melbourne's Gangland Wars, a series of brutal conflicts that rocked Australia's underworld in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Led by the tough-as-nails patriarch Louis Moran and his sons Mark and Jason, this family was deeply entrenched in the drug trade, living a life that mixed the glamour of big money with the grim reality of urban warfare. Their world was one where loyalty was under constant test and where any moment could erupt into violence, often leading to gruesome crimes as a tool for solving disputes and silencing rivals. The Moran saga of crime and retribution didn't just make headlines, it actually inspired the hit TV series Underbelly, which really pulled back the curtain on their lives with a mix of true events and also a little dramatic flair. This show gave viewers a front row seat to the high stakes and fatal twists of Melbourne's criminal depths, portraying the Morans not just as cold-hearted gangsters, but as complex characters navigating a deadly game. Their story is a chilling reminder of how deeply crime can run in a family and how it can spiral out into a community, leaving a legacy of fear and fascination in its wake. Next, we are talking about the Gucci family. While not criminally evil in like the traditional sense, like maybe some of the others we've spoken about today, the Gucci family's saga reads like a script from a dramatic, high-fashion thriller complete with betrayal, opulence, and a dash of cold-blooded crime. This illustrious famous Italian family known worldwide for their luxury fashion brand has found themselves in the headlines for far more sinister reasons. Maurizio Gucci, the charming but embattled grandson of the founder Guccio Gucci, met a tragic end in 1995 when he was gunned down in Milan. The mastermind behind his killing was none other than his glamorous ex-wife, Patrizia Reggiani, who was dubbed the Black Widow by the press. She hired a hitman to kill Maurizio after their divorce, reportedly unhappy with his handling of the family fortune and his plans to marry another woman. This shocking act was the culmination of years of family infighting and luxury living gone awry, where the quest for control and the Gucci empire led to a series of disputes, legal battles, and financial missteps. As the Gucci family's dirty laundry aired in public, the world watched a real-life drama that overshadowed the brand's glossy image, showing that even in the world of high fashion, the price of greed and heartbreak can definitely be deadly. And finally on our list today, we are talking about the House of Habsburg. This was like the ultimate European royal powerhouse, ruling over the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and Austria for hundreds of years. They were super influential, but they had a very strange way of keeping power within the family. They just married their own cousins. Lots of intermarriage to keep the dynasty pure, but this led to some very serious problems. The most notorious was the Habsburg jaw, a jutting jawline that was so pronounced in some family members that they had trouble speaking and eating. The most extreme case was Charles II of Spain, a guy whose health and mental abilities were so affected by these genetic issues that his reign is often cited as a major factor in the decline of the Spanish Empire. He was known as the Bewitched because of his various ailments and how they affected his rule. The poor guy's health was a total mess, and since he couldn't produce an heir, his death marked the end of the Habsburg line in Spain. This whole entire saga shows how the Habsburgs' obsession with keeping it in the family led to their downfall, turning them into a textbook example of why genetic diversity matters, especially if you're running an empire. Starting off our list today, we are talking about the House of Plantagenet. This was like a real-life version of Game of Thrones, ruling over England from the mid-12th to the late 15th centuries. These guys were at the center of the Wars of the Roses, a messy, bloody series of civil wars that were basically one giant family feud over who got to wear the crown. The family split into two main factions, the Yorks and the Lancasters. Think of them as the ultimate sibling rivalry, but instead of fighting over who gets the remote, they battled it out for the English throne. This internal family drama wasn't just a couple of minor skirmishes, it was a full-on warfare that threw England into chaos for decades. Castles were besieged, armies marched across the country, and battles left fields soaked in blood. Kings were made and unmade in battles like those at St. Albans, Towton, the bloodiest day in English history, and Bosworth, where Richard III famously lost his crown and his life to Henry Tudor, ending the Plantagenet rule and starting the Tudor dynasty. But the family were more than just their civil wars. They were a complicated bunch with a knack for political maneuvering, backstabbing, and dramatic public displays. They built some of England's most famous castles and were responsible for significant legal reforms. But let's be honest, they're mainly remembered for their spectacular fallouts and the way they turned sibling rivalry into a national sport. Their legacy is a story of power, betrayal, and the high cost of the throne, painting a vivid picture of medieval monarchy in all of its brutal glory. Next, we are talking about the Tverdieva family. In Stavropol, Russia, there was a family that turned their lives into a real-life horror movie. Meet the Tverdieva family, led by Inessa and her husband Roman, along with their daughters Victoria and Anastasia. This family wasn't just your average family next door. Over 6 years, starting as early as 2007, they embarked on a terrifying crime spree across the region. Inessa, a former nursery school teacher, and Roman, a dentist, led their family into a very dark world of crime, robbing, and eliminating anyone who got in their way. The family's method was chilling. They used camping trips as a cover to scout for their next victims, ranging from police officers to innocent travelers. Their most notorious crime was the brutal attack on the Chudakov family, where they mercilessly ended the lives of the family, taking trivial items while leaving more valuable assets untouched. This family of serial killers showcased a bizarre mix of domestic life and ruthless criminal activity, making them one of the most disturbing families in recent history. Their reign of terror ended in 2013 when they were finally captured, revealing a cache of weapons and stolen goods. Next, we are talking about the Kelly family. Back in 1887, the Kelly family ran a seemingly innocent inn in Kansas, a place that promised rest for cattle ranchers and travelers trekking across the dusty plains. Led by William Kelly along with his wife Kate, their son Bill, and daughter Kit, this family wasn't just serving up hospitality. They had a very sinister side that turned their homely inn into a deadly trap. The Kellys had a gruesome setup, a chair positioned over a trapdoor at their dining table. Unsuspecting guests who sat there would plummet through the floor, often to their deaths. If the fall didn't do the trick, members of the Kelly family would descend into the darkness to finish the job. But like all dark secrets, this one didn't stay hidden forever. After several travelers failed to reach their destinations, whispers and suspicions grew. When the Kelly family suddenly fled towards Mexico, the local authorities inspected the inn. What they found was the stuff of nightmares. Numerous bodies hidden beneath the house, in the stable, and near the barn, revealing the true horror of what went on at the inn. Legend has it that a furious posse caught up with the Kellys, and in a swift, brutal act of frontier justice, the family finally met their end. Next, we are talking about the Staffelbach family. In the rugged and wild heartland of Kansas, there once lurked a family that could give any horror movie a run for its money. Led by the matriarch Nancy Staffelbach, this family wasn't just running a brothel, they were running a death trap. The nightmare is believed to have started when her sons, Ed and Mike, lost control and, in a violent fit of rage, took the lives of two women who were living at their brothel. But they didn't stop there. The Staffelbachs turned their establishment into a macabre business, robbing and taking the lives of many of the unsuspecting souls who wandered in looking for some company. While the law only managed to pin one crime against a minor whose body was unceremoniously dumped in a mine shaft on the family, whispers and rumors suggested that the Staffelbachs might have been responsible for up to 50 deaths. The true extent of their gruesome spree remains buried in history, but the chilling legacy of Nancy and her sons serve as a dark reminder of the evil that can fester behind closed doors, turning a simple house into a den of death and despair. Next, we are talking about the Murdoch family. A long-standing pillar of South Carolina's legal scene, this family turned from being revered into reviled as their saga unfolded like a Southern Gothic tale dripping with scandal and tragedy. Starting in the 18th century, the Murdochs were a force in the Low Country, dominating the judiciary for nearly a century. 3 generations of Randolph Murdaws consecutively held the post of circuit solicitor from 1920 to 2006, earning the 5-county area the name Murdoch Country. The family's law firm, founded in 1910 by Randolph Murdoch Sr., thrived on personal injury litigation. However, beneath the surface of legal triumphs lay a murky world of crime and corruption. Richard Alex Murdoch, along with various family members, became embroiled in a web of killing, fraud, theft, and witness intimidation. The turning point came in 2019 when Alex's son Paul was charged with felony counts related to a fatal boating accident, sparking allegations of preferential treatment. The dark underbelly of the Murdoch dynasty was fully exposed in June 2021 when Alex's wife Maggie and son Paul were found with their lives taken at their estate. Alex was later charged with the crime, and in 2023 he was found guilty, receiving 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. This high-profile case, covered extensively by media, including an entire Netflix series, peeled back layers of a family that wielded enormous power, only to be undone by their own grievous misdeeds. From legal luminaries to convicted felons, the Murdochs' story is a dramatic fall from grace, marked by a tragic blend of power, deception, and violence that turned Murdoch country into a land of infamy. Next, we are talking about Gerald and Charlene Gallego. Between 1978 and 1980, Sacramento, California was the hunting ground for a notorious couple who embarked on a terrifying crime spree, leaving a trail of horror behind them. Gerald and Charlene were a deadly duo who kidnapped women, turning them into their captives and subjecting them to unspeakable horrors before brutally ending their lives. In total, they claimed 10 innocent lives. Their reign of terror came to an abrupt end after a particularly bold kidnapping of Craig Miller and Mary Elizabeth Sowers, witnessed by the victim's friend, who quickly noted the van's license plate. Despite this, the evil couple managed to take the lives of Craig and Mary before the police could catch up. Gerald was sentenced to death in both California and Nevada, symbolizing the gravity of his crimes, while Charlene, turned informant, received a comparatively lenient 16-year sentence, walking free in 1997. Gerald's life ended in prison due to rectal cancer in 2002, but the dark shadow of their deeds lingers in the memory of Sacramento to this day. Next, we are talking about David Alan Gore and Fred Waterfield. In the early 1980s, this duo, known as the Killing Cousins, unleashed a horrifying spree of violence against women. These 2 cousins were not just family, they were partners in a chilling series of gruesome crimes. They attacked their victims, dismembering their bodies and hiding them in unmarked graves. Gore, the more outspoken of the 2, was found guilty of taking the lives of 6 women and definitely didn't hesitate to drag Waterfield into the nightmare, claiming he was involved in every attack. Despite this, Waterfield played the innocence card, bizarrely claiming that he was just a hostage in the whole situation. But the evidence, of course, stacked up against him, and while Gore faced execution in 2013, 30 years after their brutal crimes, Waterfield ended up with a life sentence behind bars. Next, we are talking about Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bueno Jr. Known as the Hillside Stranglers, these cousins were a chilling example of family ties turned toxic. These 2 turned the hills of Los Angeles into a nightmare landscape between 1977 and 1978, where they went on a crime spree that ended in taking the lives of 10 young women. What's particularly twisted is how they operated under the guise of police officers to lure their victims, showing a creepy level of cunning and manipulation. Their crimes, which originally threw investigators off by making them think a single person was behind them, revealed the dark potential of what can happen when family bonds are combined with a shared psychopathic streak. After their spree, the gruesome discoveries of the victims' bodies on the hillside sent shockwaves through the city, marking them as one of the most notorious pairs in American crime history. Bianchi tried to play the insanity card, but eventually both he and Buono were caught and convicted, proving that even the closest of family can't escape the long arm of the law when they spiral into such deep evil. Next, we are talking about the Fox sisters. These were 3 siblings from Rochester, New York, who sparked the entire spiritualism movement in the 19th century. Initially, young sisters Kate and Margaret Fox fooled people into believing that they could communicate with spirits using mysterious rappings. Their older sister Leah saw an opportunity and managed their careers, turning them into famous mediums. For years, they convinced many that they were channeling the dead, influencing a wave of spiritual belief across America. However, the spooky tale took a twist in 1888 when Margaret publicly admitted that it was all a hoax. She showed that the eerie sounds were actually made by just cracking their toe joints. Despite their confession, the fascination with spiritualism didn't die down. It actually continued to grow, showing just how eager people were to believe in the possibility way of contacting the afterlife. The story of the Fox sisters is a fascinating mix of deceit, fame, and the human desire to find meaning beyond this world, wrapped up in a legacy that is still debated today. Their journey from small-town tricksters to founders of a major movement shows just how powerful and persuasive a well-spun tale can be, especially when it flirts a little with the unknown. And finally, on our list today, we are talking about the Wildenstein family. Renowned as powerhouse art dealers, the Wildensteins have been at the center of the art world for generations, known for their eye for priceless works and their knack for acquiring them. But it's not just all classy galleries and elegant auctions. This family has found themselves repeatedly in the hot seat for some pretty dodgy behavior. Accusations of fraud, theft, and massive tax evasion have clung to them like paint on a palette. They're like the art world's version of a heist movie, but instead of robbing banks, they're allegedly dodging taxes and swindling heirs out of their rightful inheritances. Their private lives are just as colorful and controversial. There's been messy public divorces that could rival any soap opera, with family members squabbling over their vast fortune. In one particularly juicy episode, a member of the family apparently tried to hide hundreds of millions of dollars worth of art from his estranged wife, leading to a scandal that had everyone from Paris to New York whispering over their champagne glasses. It's like they took the phrase family drama and decided to crank it up to an 11. With the Wildensteins, it's not just about selling art, it's about mastering the art of scandal.
The Chicken Whackers. Sounds like a comedy troupe rather than a cult, but there are some very disturbing stories about this group. Now, it's hard to find any real info on them. They are very elusive. Not a lot of people know about the Chicken Whackers, but for those living on the streets of Colorado, especially in Grand Junction, stories about the Chicken Whackers are whispered about all the time. Even some law enforcement have heard of the group, which has been described as this cross between a satanic cult and a cartel. There are stories about the group performing dark rituals and human sacrifices, kidnapping homeless people in the night, and also being involved in the black market. The group is so underground that authorities really aren't even sure if they exist or if it's just some urban legend, but one thing is for sure, homeless people on the streets feel that they're under constant threat from some kind of group.
Next up, we've got one that you might know. It's the Order of the Solar Temple, which for some reason I always want to pronounce as Templar. I think it's because of the Knights of Templar. That's irrelevant. It's a religious cult founded by Jim Jones. It was founded in Indiana in 1955. When the cult was created, Jones used a blend of Christian, socialist, and communist ideals to entice his followers to join him, and it worked. At its peak, the cult organization had attracted thousands of followers. Although the People's Temple originally had its headquarters and held its meetings in North America, mainly California, it eventually moved to Guyana after receiving a significant amount of backlash from the US media, which of course is what sparked the birth of Jonestown, a cult commune in Guyana home to around 900 People's Temple cult members, including Jim Jones himself. Shortly after the move to South America, the United States media began receiving reports of cult members participating in rehearsals of mass voluntary death. At this time, residents of Jonestown were also being subjected to attack simulations, one of which lasted 6 days, and members of the cult were only informed after the incident was over that it had just been a drill. In 1978, a congressman, Leo Ryan, visited the commune on a fact-finding mission, and he ended up leaving with 5 temple members who no longer wished to be a part of the organization. I do not blame them. Jones let him leave the compound, but then had him and many others killed as they tried to board a plane back to North America. Later that month, Jones staged a mass killing. He ordered his disciples to drink poison and fired weapons at ones who refused. 909 people died that day, including Jones himself, who, after the deaths of his disciples, turned the weapon on himself and took his own life. That's a pretty big number Manson family has nothing on them.
Next on the list, we have the New Light of God, an evangelical cult who attempted to evangelize a native tribe in Panama back in 2020, but rather than spreading messages of peace and love, they resorted to violence and brutality in their attempts to convert the indigenous Nabe people. They used fear and intimidation to try and bring them into the fold and have them repent for their supposed sins. They attacked villagers, clubbing and burning and hacking them to death with machetes. Several villagers had shown up at the hospital with severe burns on their tongues and mouths, covered in bruises. Police ended up storming the area, breaking up this insane ritual which was going on right when they arrived. It was happening in a makeshift church that the group had constructed. 2 pregnant women were tied up. In front of them was a goat that had just been ritualistically sacrificed. The survivors were rescued and 10 people were arrested in connection to the cult. Nearby was a shallow grave with the remains of 7 dead villagers who'd been killed by Mario Gonzalez, the leader of the cult. The most disturbing part: most of the villagers he killed were related to him. 5 were his grandchildren, and 1, Beline Flores, was his very own daughter.
Next up, we've got Heaven's Gate. Shout out, Eternal Atake. Like Solar Temple, you might have heard of this one before, but let's get into the nitty gritty. Heaven's Gate was a UFO cult founded in the early 1970s by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, both of whom believed that aliens would visit the Earth and wipe it clean in the year 1997. It was a smaller cult with about 39 active members who were taught by Applewhite and Nettles to believe that the human body was nothing more than a container, a disgusting container, and to abandon the human body meant giving oneself the opportunity to ascend to a higher realm, which the pair referred to as the Kingdom of Heaven, which they believed was located on the Hale-Bopp comet, a real comet set to make its closest interaction with Earth in the year 1997. And of course, by abandoning the human body, Applewhite and Nettles had been referring to one taking their own life. But prior to the final act, members of the cult were told that they had to prepare their souls by following a strict set of guidelines that would grant them access to the Kingdom of Heaven. No family ties, no ties with anyone outside of the group for that matter, no worldly possessions, and no adult activities with others or oneself. Some people went so far as to get the old to keep their urges down. Anyways, when 1997 rolled around, Nettles was dead, and Marshall Applewhite, who despite guidelines he had set for the group had been having adult relations with many of the members, convinced his followers to drink poison and end their lives, which they did, and Applewhite followed suit.
The Angels Landing cult was led by a man named Daniel Perez. He and his followers lived on a lavish commune in Wichita, Kansas, where Perez secretly ran life insurance frauds, and it gets much worse than that. He was living off of life insurance which he'd received from his deceased followers, who he'd actually killed, but would promise that they were going to come back from the dead. See, he'd convinced his followers that he was an angel who could see into the future. Oh, and of course he managed to convince families on the commune that he needed to sleep with their daughters in order to stay alive. In February of 2015, Perez's crimes came to light and he received 20 life sentences. Perfect for a, eternally living angel, I guess.
Next up, we've got the Order of the Solar Temple, a religious cult founded in Geneva in 1984 by 2 men, Joseph de Montbreau and Luc Jort. I can't speak French. With its beliefs, originally rooted in New Age spiritualism, the cult, which had garnered the attention of people from Switzerland all the way to Canada, soon began revolving around the idea of the world's end. AKA, it became a doomsday cult. Classic. By the 1990s, the cult had gained quite a bit of attention from Canadian authorities who believed that the leaders of the group had been coercing members into having adult relations with them, which prompted a number of members to part ways with the sham organization. In 1994, a former member spoke out against the cult publicly and was later killed in his home, as were his wife and their son. A few days after that incident, things started to really heat up. Literally. 2 solar temple buildings in Switzerland were intentionally set on fire in a mass voluntary death ritual event that claimed the lives of 48 members, including the organization's founders, although it is believed that not all of those who died in the fire were willing participants. The following year, in 1995, a solar temple in the Swiss Alps met the same fate, killing 16, and in 1997, 74 cult members and former cult members died after a fire was intentionally set in a home in Quebec, in Canada.
Next up, we have the Church of the Lamb of God. Yeah, all these names are very similar. It's always the Church of the Solar something, the Temple of the something something, the Chicken Whackers. This creepy cult was led by a man named Ervil LeBaron. Ervil, spelled E-R-V-I-L. Never has a first name been so close to being 100% accurate. Just take that R out of there. Like pretty much every cult leader in history, LeBaron believed he was a prophet and claimed to receive divine revelations, but these revelations often led to violent actions against those he deemed as enemies or rivals. Now, under his leadership, the Church of the Lamb of God became a dangerous cult with members willing to kill at his command. They carried out attacks on perceived threats, including other religious leaders and mostly former followers who dared to speak out against the mighty LeBaron. But on June 1st of 1979, LeBaron was arrested. Now, even while in prison though, his reign of terror continued. He wrote a 400-page Bible known as the Book of the New Covenants, which included a hit list of targets that his followers were to take out. On June 27th, 1988, at exactly 4 p.m., 3 of LeBaron's former followers were killed all at once, all in separate locations. But in total, about 25 people were killed as a result of LeBaron's prison cell orders at later dates. And there are still former members in hiding to this day, still afraid that they'll be taken out by the few remaining members of the cult.
Next up, we have Madame Moros, a cult rooted in illicit substances and human sacrifice. Well, it was half cult, half the psychotic rationalization of substance dealers. The organization was discovered in 1989 when authorities found the bodies of 12 men buried on a ranch in Mexico near the United States border, and 3 more later in another location. 3 men were implicated in the killing who, when arrested, claimed that the 15 deceased individuals had not been killed, but rather sacrificed in a ritual they believed would provide protection to their substance smuggling operation. They were wrong. But when police dove further into the operation, they realized that it was in fact a cult, and a satanic one at that, led by Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo and Sarah Aldrate, who was referred to by disciples simply as the witch. When the pair learned that their organization had been infiltrated by authorities, they fled with a few of their followers. While on the run, Costanzo instructed one of his followers to kill him and then himself. When police finally caught up to the group, Costanzo, along with his disciple, were dead, and Aldrate, aka the witch, was arrested and sentenced to 62 years in prison for her crimes.
Probably all heard of the true Russian Orthodox Church. I've talked about them a couple times before. Well, this is another Russian cult that lived underground. This one might be even creepier. A man named You know what? I'm not even trying to pronounce his name. Editor, just put it right on the screen. Come on, I'm not Russian. Anyway, he led a secretive cult in Russia where around 70 people, most of them underage, lived underground in catacombs. And not just for a month or two, this had been going on for a long time. Some of them had never even seen daylight before, which is nuts. Sattarov claimed he was Allah's messenger on Earth, and his followers believed him. The cult was discovered by authorities in August of 2012 during a routine check of Muslim communities near Kazan. When authorities found them, many were sick, suffering from poor ventilation. Some even had tuberculosis, apparently. And Sattarov's home, which was built above the underground complex, had also been built illegally, so it was to be demolished. And a bunch of the cult members were ready to defend their leader's home, threatening to throw themselves in front of construction machinery when the police tried to demolish it. They did end up demolishing it, though.
And finally, we have the Davidians, led by, get this, David. I'm no doctor, but it sounds like this guy's a bit of a narcissist. In 1987, David Koresh took what was once a Seventh-day Adventist religious group and turned it into a Doomsday cult. Fun stuff. By 1993, the group had taken over and were living in a compound known as the Mount Carmel Center, located in Waco, Texas. And boy, were they wacko. The center is where they prepared for the world's end and the second coming of Christ, which David Koresh told his followers would likely come sooner than expected. During this time, David also procured himself many, what he called spiritual wives, who he would regularly engage in adult activities with, and many of whom were quite young. It is also believed that by this time the group had been stockpiling weapons in preparation for Armageddon, or more likely in the event that the government tried to shut them down, which the government did try twice. The first infiltration attempt took place in early 1993. Police obtained search warrants for the compound as well as an arrest warrant for David and some of his followers, but David had been alerted of the authorities' arrival, and so he was ready, if you know what I mean. The result, 4 officers and 8 Davidians dead. After that, the FBI stepped in, but it appears as though David had had enough of the back and forth, and as soon as the FBI made their first move, launching a tear gas canister into the compound, members of the cult set the place on fire, causing the deaths of 76 Davidians, including David Koresh himself.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the good times. Some people don't want to talk about the good times they had while in a cult because, well, people expect it to have all been bad. When someone is trying to describe the horrible events they went through, it can be difficult to include positives. Part of this definitely stems from the stigma surrounding it. The fear of, if I talk about things I enjoyed, does that mean people won't believe the bad stuff? It doesn't have to have been all bad for it to have been a terrible experience and a place that a person needed out of, but I could totally understand how to some it could feel that way. Every person's experience is always going to be different, but regardless of the experience, the feelings regarding it are valid and important. Unfortunately, some people are made to feel bad for not having an entirely terrible time, which leads some people to only recount the horrors of the cult in fear of being misunderstood. In our number 9 spot today, we have losing family members. It is not uncommon for people who have survived cults to experience the loss of a family member. This happens in a multitude of ways, whether it's losing family members who are still in the cult, having lost family member relationships when joining the cult, or potentially even losing someone from the events that took place within the cult. What I'm trying to say is that it happens quite often, and it's not something a lot of people want to talk about, and who could blame them? It is quite common for multiple members of one family to be in the same cult, but it's not quite so common for all of those members to recognize the situation and be ready to leave at the same time. Leaving a cult would be difficult enough, let alone when it involves leaving someone you care about behind. It absolutely makes sense why this subject would be one people choose to stay away from more often than not. In our number 8 spot today, we have the day-to-day. We often hear about the major events of the cult, but it's not often that we hear the survivors just speaking about the typical day-to-day things, such as the rules they had to follow. There's a multitude of reasons for why this might be the case, and they range from things like perhaps it was boring and they don't think anyone would care, all the way to more serious things like perhaps there were certain rules or rituals that they aren't comfortable discussing. Every cult is different and every person is different, so it's an entirely personal experience on how much someone is willing to discuss about their life while in the cult. In our number 7 spot today, we have the bad times. When I use the phrase the bad times, I'm talking about certain specific actions that I can't use the proper word for here on YouTube, but it sounds similar to obtuse, if you catch my drift. This is something that sometimes cult survivors don't talk about for some pretty obvious reasons. These kinds of experiences are unfortunately common in the dangerous cult world, and it undoubtedly is the cause of trauma for a lot of those who manage to survive these harmful places. Some people end up never talking about these experiences at all publicly, and some need some time to sort through their own feelings and the things they've experienced before being able to open up about it. Either way, there's no right or wrong answer on these things, and how each person chooses to cope is perfectly reasonable and something that absolutely should be respected. In our number 6 spot today, we have how they joined. This is one that sometimes people don't want to talk about for the fear of judgment. No one wakes up one day thinking it's the perfect time to join a cult. In fact, many people who end up surviving cults didn't even necessarily realize they were in one in the beginning. That's the trick with these things. ways. It often is only realized once the trouble starts or once that person is already dependent on the cult in one way or another. People are afraid of being judged for not seeing the signs earlier, but that is part of how cults work. They are extremely manipulative and secretive, and sometimes the signs aren't always clear, especially when you're in the mix of things. A lot of harmful cults have been designed to appear as self-help groups, for example. A person who is seeking guidance and help for their life and is in a vulnerable spot shouldn't have to be on the lookout for someone who is trying to prey on their position, but unfortunately that really is the reality a lot of the time. It is not the fault of the survivor for not seeing the signs or realizing the situation they were in, and it definitely is the fault of those people who choose to take advantage of people who are just simply trying to better themselves. In our number 5 spot today, we have how they left. The process of leaving a cult certainly isn't easy. I mean, if it was, wouldn't everyone be doing it? This process can include a multitude of different things, and it can be difficult in many different ways. A lot of cults make sure those who are joining become isolated from their loved ones outside of the cult, so not having the same kind of support system outside when trying to leave can be extremely difficult. Some people are afraid of the repercussions as well, which would be extremely scary and could potentially cause someone to stay in their situation longer than intended, and for some, I'm sure it's the reason they never leave at all. Being inside of a dark and dangerous cult is frightening, I'm sure, but the unknown of what happens after might even be scarier to the people who are actively in the situation. It might look easy from an outside perspective, but that certainly is not necessarily the case for most. In our number 4 spot today, we have the aftermath. We don't often hear people discuss the aftermath of what happened after they left the cult. Things like rebuilding their relationships with those outside of the cult, the healing process for the things they endured, or the other multitude of things that would happen after leaving. This one is pretty self-explanatory because the healing process isn't anyone else's business unless that person chooses to share their experience. After any difficult experience, there are things to be worked through, and as beautiful as the healing process is, it can also be really ugly and an absolute struggle. This is another one of those things that is incredibly individual and really is up to the person who survived these experiences. In our number 3 spot today, we have their roles in the cult. In a cult, it is common for people to have certain roles within. These roles can be dependent on things like age and gender, but of course it's all dependent on what the cult needs and what it focuses on. Some people who have survived cults don't feel like sharing their roles that they had. This could be because of certain trauma they experienced. Perhaps some people in cults had a position where they had to recruit others to join, and now that they've left, they express remorse for that position. Regardless of whatever the reason or whatever the role, this is just one of those things that not everyone is comfortable speaking about. Until a cult survivor chooses to share these things, it truly is none of our business. Some people might be nervous about sharing these things or the inner workings of the cult that they experienced. In our number 2 spot today, we have parents. There are a lot of cult survivors out there who were brought into the cults as children by their parents. This creates a sticky situation for a lot of people, and it's also something that is extremely personal. Some hold this against their parents, and others find ways to work through these decisions that affected them. This is such an intricate and confusing scenario that everyone reacts differently to, and it's just something that not a lot of people are comfortable opening up about, which is extremely valid. I mean, it can be hard to open up about the little things you're mad at your parents for, so this huge thing would be extremely difficult to open up about, especially with the entire world. A parent-child dynamic is already complicated enough without the added, "you brought me into a cult" thing. In our number 1 spot today, we have the loss after. There are people who were able to survive their scary cult experiences with others that they love. People like the Phoenixes, who were brought into a cult at a young age and managed to escape at an older age. As we all well know, however, everyone deals with trauma in different ways, and sometimes there are certain situations where it all becomes too much to bear. It would be incredibly difficult to escape a scary cult only to later lose someone as a consequence of those cult experiences. It would absolutely make sense as to why someone wouldn't want to talk about something like that. It would be hard enough as is, but adding a loss like that after is unimaginable. Starting off this list, we are talking about the Lafferty brothers. Ron and Dan were not just your typical criminals, part of a radical polygamist group that broke away from the mainstream Mormon church. These brothers turned their religious beliefs into a nightmare. In 1984, they shockingly claimed that God had told them to commit horrifying crimes. Their victims? Couple members of their own family. family. The brutality of the crimes involving a weapon and a very personal attack absolutely rocked the nation, especially because the brothers showed no remorse, believing that they were carrying out a divine command. This very chilling story is a stark reminder of how dangerously twisted the path of fanaticism can definitely become. Next, we are talking about the Ripper Crew, often remembered as one of Chicago's most horrifying gangs in the early 1980s. This was not just an average group of criminals. They were led by the disturbingly charismatic Robin Gecht. This quartet of men transformed their twisted fantasies into a very gruesome reality. Their crimes weren't just shocking for the sheer brutality of them, they involved some horrific details that ended in the deaths of at least 18 women. But of course, it didn't stop there. The Ripper Crew elevated their wickedness to another level with human consumption and very bizarre ritualistic practices, including amputations performed to satisfy Gecht's grotesque obsessions. Their rituals, believed to involve eating parts of their victims as a way to gain power, still send shivers down the spine of those who remember the case. Just horrific. There's really no other word for it other than just absolutely horrific. Next up, we are talking about the Papin sisters. The Papin sisters, Christine and Leah, were the centerpiece of one of France's most chilling cases. Back in 1933, these two seemingly quiet live-in maids snapped in a spectacularly horrific way. They brutally took the life of their employer's wife and daughter in France. The details were gruesome. The victims' eyes were gouged out, and the attacks were so violent that even the police couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't just a simple crime of rage. The sisters worked in tandem, methodically carrying out the crimes in a way that left the nation reeling. What makes the sisters' story so captivating is how it peeled back the veneer of domestic tranquility to expose a deep, dark vein of class tension and psychological turmoil. These sisters weren't just maids, they were symbols of the oppressed working class, pushed to the brink by their subservient roles and eventually breaking in the most dramatic way possible. I'm definitely not victim blaming at all. It just is definitely one of those cases where there's just a lot going on. The backstory is pretty wild. Their trial was of course a media sensation, stirring up debates about mental health, workers' rights, and the hidden despair lurking in ordinary lives. In the end, the sisters' saga is a macabre tale of what happens when the human mind is pushed too far, wrapped in a mystery that still fascinates and horrifies people to this day. And I'm sure for as long as we remember the story, it will always be absolutely horrifying. Next, we are talking about the Briley brothers, Linwood, James, and Anthony, who all turned 1979 Richmond, Virginia into their personal hunting ground in a chilling spree that lasted over 7 months. These brothers weren't picky, they engaged in random acts of violence, home invasions, and cold-blooded crimes, racking up at least 11 victims. Their reign of terror included not just killing, but also tormenting their victims and stealing anything that they could get their hands on. Just imagine the fear that gripped Richmond as these brothers moved from one crime to the next, seemingly always one step ahead of the law. The manhunt to catch them was one of Virginia's most intense and nerve-wracking, with the whole community holding its breath until they were thankfully finally brought to justice. Next, we're talking about the Bloody Benders, who were like the horror movie family you hope to never meet. Operating in Kansas during the 1870s, they ran a seemingly innocent inn and general store, but with a very grisly twist. The family, led by the very mysterious John Bender and his equally mysterious kin, had a very chilling side hustle, killing their guests for cash. Travelers would check in and, well, they wouldn't really check out. The Benders cleverly positioned their victims at a seat of honor at their dinner table, which was unfortunately placed over a trap door. I'm not laughing, that's just crazy that that's real. I feel like that's only in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but nope, very real. After a hearty meal, the guest would be whacked on the head and then dropped into the cellar to meet a very grim fate. This went on until the neighborhood started noticing that people who visited the Benders tended to disappear into thin air. Honest to God, thank you for the nosy neighbor in that situation. Alright, sometimes a nosy neighbor can be annoying, but I guess when the Benders are in town, we need them. When the suspicions grew too intense, the Benders did what any family of criminal masterminds would do. They vanished. By the time the locals pieced everything together and dug up the property, the Benders were long gone, leaving behind a legacy that turned their homestead into an infamous chapter of Wild West lore. Yeah, they just vanished. No justice in that story. Next we are talking about Behram and the Thuggee cult. The story of Behram and the cult are like something straight out of a horror classic, but this nightmare was very real in 19th century India. Behram, who was the cult's most infamous leader, is often called one of history's worst killers. So basically, the whole thing was a secretive gang called the Thuggees, and they roamed the Indian countryside with a very chilling mission. Their MO was to befriend travelers, take their lives with a ceremonial scarf called a rumal, and then rob them blind. They did this all under the guise of worshipping the goddess Kali, believing their crimes were a form of devotion. The leader himself is said to have been directly involved in taking the lives of over 900 people. The British eventually cracked down on this crime group, but the sheer scale of their crimes and the cold-bloodedness of the leaders like Behram still boggle the mind even today. Next we're talking about the Carrington family, also sometimes known as the Fall River cult. In the late 1970s, the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts became the backdrop for a horrifying series of events. Carl Drew and Robin Murphy, two seemingly ordinary individuals, actually led a satanic cult that included members of the Carrington family. This dark and twisted group was involved in the brutal, ritualistic killings of 3 women, shocking everyone with the level of violence and the satanic practices involved. The crimes were not just gruesome, they were carried out with a ceremonial cruelty that suggested that they were more than mere killings. They were actually rituals meant to honor some nefarious unseen force. As the cult continued their sinister activities, the local community lived in fear, and the mysterious aura surrounding the Carrington family grew. Details emerged of rituals, sacrifices, and an unsettling belief in dark powers, painting a picture of a family caught in the grip of something truly evil. This saga of brutality, mysticism, and mayhem left an indelible mark on Fall River, turning the Carrington family into a name synonymous with one of the most disturbing chapters in the town's history. Next we are talking about the Cray twins, Ronnie and Reggie, and they were not just gangsters, they were celebrities of the criminal underworld in the East End of London during the swinging 50s and 60s. These twins ran their gang called The Firm, with a mix of brutal violence and a surprising dash of charm, pulling off armed robberies, running protection rackets, and setting the occasional building on fire when needed. But the Crays weren't just about the tough stuff. They rubbed elbows with politicians and pop stars, making them the feared yet fascinating faces of London's mob scene. Their story is an absolute wild ride, complete with evil crimes, glamorous parties, and a dramatic downfall that turned them into legends. Everyone knew that crossing the Crays was a one-way ticket to trouble, but it is said that their charisma made them oddly magnetic figures in London's tumultuous underbelly. Next we are talking about the Bourgeois family. This family is like the original Game of Thrones cast, full of plots, poison, and power grabs. During the Renaissance, they were like the Kardashians of their day, but way more dangerous. Rodrigo Bourgeois, who wormed his way into becoming Pope Alexander VI, was the family's superstar. Under his rule, the Vatican was less about piety and more about power plays and partying. His son Caesar was the real-life version of Machiavelli's prince, ruthless, cunning, and a master manipulator who inspired fear and respect. And then there's Lucretia, often painted as the femme fatale of the family, wrapped up in rumors of poison rings and scandalous affairs, but also a savvy political figure in her own right. Together, they turned the church and European politics into their personal chess game, leaving a trail of intrigue, mysterious deaths, and whispered secrets that make them one of history's most notorious and fascinating families. And And finally, to close out our list today, we are talking about the Sawney Bean family. You would think that a family called the Beans would be like cute and nice and wholesome, like we're the Beans. But no, of course not. It simply just has to be the stuff of nightmares. The chilling saga of the Sawney Bean family is a tale that definitely straddles the murky line between Scottish folklore and nightmarish reality. So let's take it back to the 16th century on the rugged Scottish coastlines, where a secretive clan led by the infamous Sawney Bean resides. According to legend, this family wasn't your typical band of misfits, they were human eaters. Hiding out in a secluded coastal cave, the Bean clan supposedly ambushed unsuspecting travelers at night, dragging them back to their grim abode to meet a gruesome end. The stories claim that they took the lives of and feasted on over 1,000 people, thriving in secrecy for decades. Historians, however, are a little skeptical. I'm not here to lie to you. They poke holes in the tale, questioning its authenticity and suggesting it might be more about sensationalism than historical fact. But whether myth or fact, the story of the Bean family has fascinated and horrified people for generations, making it a perfect blend of horror and historical mystery. So, was Sawney Bean a real figure of terror, or just a boogeyman born from the depths of folklore? The answer might depend on how dark you like your history served.
Charles Millis Scott Manson, B33 920, and all the rest of them.
I would just spell your last name, Mr. Manson.
Manson.
Thank you.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do. Stole some guns, went to Georgia, burglarized a store, got a straw hat full of dimes, and came to L.A. I turned 21 years old in the L.A. County Jail. I wasn't out but a hot second. I've been in jail all my life.
Charles Miles Manson, often referred to as Helter Skelter. We know him as the man who was the leader of the American cult. This cult has approximately 100 followers, and it was famously known as the Manson Family. Charles Manson has been in prison for 46 years, and he was even given the death penalty. Once when Charles Manson was just 9 years old, he decided to light his school on fire. He was troubled. Things are about to get really crazy, so you know what, sit back, relax, and let's get ready for this one. This is the prison life of Charles Manson. Charles Manson has become one of the most notorious, distinguished, well-known criminals in history. Charles Manson is one of the biggest names in criminal history. The life he lived is absolutely insane, so let's start from the beginning. Charles Miles Manson was born on November 12th, 1934, and he was an American criminal, cult leader, and a singer-songwriter. Was that actually Charles Manson? Well, it was. And is it just me, or does Charles Manson have an incredible voice? Instead of being a criminal, he could have went into the life of fame and fortune. Instead, he just got the life of fame and less fortunate imprisonment. Well, the song you heard was titled My World, and he wrote it and recorded it back in 1967. Manson could have signed to a record label and history would have been altered. Also, Manson had connections with Dennis Wilson. Now, who is that? Well, this is a pretty big deal because Dennis Wilson, he ended up creating the Beach Boys. Instead of being called part of the Beach Boys, Manson is now being called Helter Skelter, which is actually a term taken from a Beatles song of that same name. Manson thought the Beatles made the song about him. Also, the Beach Boys did record one of his songs. It was titled Cease to Exist. They changed the name. The name is Never Learn Not to Love, and it was released as a single back in 1968. It was a hit, and there was no credit to Manson. Here's a small sample of the song Cease to Exist by Charles Manson.
Never had a lesson I ever learned, but I know we all get our turn. I love you.
In 1974, Charles Manson stated his religion was Scientology. He often studied this while incarcerated. Charles Manson lived in California, and his cult was responsible for killing 9 people in 4 different locations. This took place between 1969, just 2 years after he sang My World. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people. All of the members of the cult was apparently ordered by Manson himself to commit these crimes. He was also convicted of first-degree murder for 2 other deaths.
I have a question. Are you guilty of any murders? Are you guilty of plotting any murders?
I killed a chicken once.
Any human being?
No, no.
You're absolutely innocent of any conspiracy to commit murder, or telling anyone to commit murder, or planning it?
Charles Manson is a very intelligent guy who often uses humor to defend himself. Some people say he's intelligent, while others think he's mentally unfit. I'll let you guys decide.
Tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody.
Charles Manson has also maintained his innocence. He always pleaded not guilty, and that's really what kept him in prison for a very long time. If he took some sort of plea deal, there might have been a point in his life, or in our lives, where we witnessed Charles Manson as a free person. But instead, he spent 46 years behind bars.
I didn't tie anybody up.
Okay.
I was never on the scene where anyone was killed. I think the law says you can only keep me 17 years or 18 years if I was never on the scene when anyone was killed. I was never on the crime scene of anything.
So as decades went on, he was always asked the same question. Did you do it?
Have you never felt remorse for the crimes you committed?
What crimes? I told you I haven't committed any crimes.
Do we have an innocent person in prison?
Listen, I broke no law. Try to understand that. I broke no law. I didn't step out of line with God, and I didn't step out of line with the man.
We know there are many people who are in prison for crimes that they have not committed. Is Charles Manson one of them? This is a hugely debated question. During Manson's conviction, he was originally sentenced to death, but his sentence was actually commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole after California invalidated the state's death penalty statute in 1972. This actually came just 1 year after his conviction. Manson is very lucky that the death penalty takes a very long time to actually carry out. Manson avoided the death penalty, but he wasn't able to get paroled from prison. He spent almost 5 decades behind bars.
Look at the madness that goes on. You can't prove anything that happened yesterday. Now is the only thing that's real.
Manson's criminal career actually started at a very young age. Like I said, he torched his own school. So when Manson was just 17 years old back in 1951, he committed another crime. He was sent away to jail. While he was deemed insane and on a psychiatric recommendation, he was transferred to Natural Bridge Honor Camp, which is a minimum security institution. Manson was able to go home to his aunt's house so she can help him out, maybe help him find work, but soon after, Manson was caught raping a boy at knife point. He was put in jail once again. During this time, he committed a further 8 serious disciplinary offenses, 3 involving homosexual acts. Because of these behaviors, he was transferred into a maximum security reformity located in Ohio. He was expected to remain in prison and released on his 21st birthday, which was in November of 1955. Good behavior for Manson during this time actually led him to an early release. Staying out of prison didn't last long at all. 1959, Manson pleaded guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged US Treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox. That charge was actually dropped, but then he received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation for another crime. What was this one for? Well, he forced a 16-year-old girl to prostitute. He was like her pimp. By 1967, at the age of 33 years old, Manson spent more than half of his life in prison and other institutions. Age 34 years old, Manson dedicated his time to create this cult, well, his cult.
When they were A small, bizarre character named Charles Manson was charged with provoking his apparently fanatic followers to commit the crimes, and a national obsession to understand these people began. Who was Charles Manson? On August 8, 1969, unknown intruders broke into the fashionable Los Angeles home of movie director Roman Polanski and his pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate. There they slaughtered her and 4 others.
It was at McNeil Island Penitentiary that Manson developed a skill at the guitar and an interest in music that would play an important part in later events. The man who taught him the steel guitar was an aging fellow prisoner, the renowned Depression-era gangster Alvin "Creepy" Karpus.
Charles Manson may not have killed anyone with his bare hands, but it is believed he told people to kill, and those actions were carried out. The Manson family was responsible for many crimes, like assaults, thefts, and there were even reports of an attempted assassination of the President of the United States at the time, President Gerald Ford.
40 years ago today, Sarah Jane Moore aimed a gun at President Gerald Ford in San Francisco and fired a single bullet. The bullet missed Ford by inches. That attempt came just 17 days after another woman, a Charles Manson follower, tried to assassinate Ford.
So the first attempt on the president's life was a member of the Manson family, and the second attempt of the president's life was from another woman named Sarah Jane Moore, who was in prison for 32 years. Well, she's out now, and she's become famous.
Like that, but you tried to kill the President of the United States back then.
Yes, but it makes it sound like I was a totally different person, and I was pretty much the person I am now. Had gotten into something over my head, I will admit that.
Charles Manson started to become a household name in the 80s. He gave 4 interviews to mainstream media. The first one was recorded at California Medical Facility, and it aired in 1981. It appeared on The Tomorrow Show by Tom Snyder on NBC.
And that's about the extent of it. All this occult, all that hocus pocus stuff that you guys are playing, I don't know nothing about all that.
You know nothing about something called Helter Skelter. You know nothing about...
Yeah, I know about Helter Skelter. It was a song that some people sang.
And that's all it was.
And some other kids picked it up in their minds. And I've been in jail all my life, so I'm actually right here at home. How long have I been in jail? 34 years? 34 years, so...
Out of 47, you've been here 34.
I've been in jail, prison, a long time. All my life. I was raised up in here.
Charles Manson is very influential, and something about him allows himself to get people to do whatever he wants to do.
This morning, investigators are trying to figure out if crazed cult leader Charles Manson has a new flock of disciples. Over the weekend, Manson follower 63-year-old Craig Hammond was arrested for allegedly trying to sneak a wristwatch cell phone to the notorious killer locked behind bars.
Manson doesn't know life outside of prison. He even once said that it's a good idea for him to stay in prison because what he has done in the past, he's willing to do it again, and he would do it much better this time. In 1984, an inmate, Jan Holstrom, poured paint thinner on Manson and set his body on fire. So Manson actually has burns all over his body. It covers about 20% of his body, which is quite significant. Because of this, Manson was often kept in isolation, and he was moved around to different prison facilities and jails. In 1989, he was housed at San Quentin State Prison. This prison is known for its toughness.
Do you believe that there should be a death penalty?
A death penalty?
Yes, for someone who commits a murder or something like that.
Aren't we all born to die? We're born with a death penalty.
In a gas chamber?
In a gas chamber. Well,
or by hanging, or by an electric chair.
I see what you're searching for.
Should there be a supreme penalty for committing a crime?
What do you think?
I'm the one who's asking you.
Charles Manson was often clever with his responses. Oftentimes, he would just ask the question back. So that was an interview at San Quentin Prison. Even in prison, it seemed like he still had connections to the outside world and had followers inside of the prison as well. In 2009, Manson was caught with a cell phone, and he had contacted people in California, New Jersey, Florida, and British Columbia. So he might have actually had ties in Canada. Later in life, Manson decided to have a Nazi swastika on his forehead. And of course, this became very controversial. Okay, so Manson's prison life story, it sort of came to an end. He has been denied parole many times. He was given 12 parole hearings, and at the 12th one, I guess he realized he's just not going to be released from prison, so he skipped that one, he didn't go to it. The panel at his hearing always noted that Manson had a history of controlling behavior and mental health issues, including schizophrenia and paranoid delusional disorder, which posed a greater danger to himself and to the society. So they just couldn't release him. On November 19, 2017, just a few years back, when he was just 83 years old, that's when he passed away. The beginning of 2017, so in January, he was suffering from gastrointestinal bleeding at California State Prison. He was rushed to Mercy Hospital. Well, they didn't have Mercy at this hospital because Manson needed surgery, but doctors considered him too weak for surgery, so they just returned him back to prison. Whatever treatment he had received at the hospital was not disclosed. So maybe he didn't receive anything at all, and I'm sure there are many conspiracy theories out there saying that the doctors, they could have done something, they just didn't want to do something. They didn't want to help this man. I doubt that's what happened. Well, on November, Manson had a heart attack and he passed away. He might have died, but his legacy, his life story, his cultural impact will always live on. Manson left everything to his son, Matthew Roberts. It must be so crazy knowing that your father is Charles Manson.
But I can assure them I have no desire for that money whatsoever. I have my own money. My situation is fine. And I don't want the negativity and the energy that goes along with that money, to be honest with you. So yeah, I've been accused of a variety of things.
So I tried to absolutely confirm it that that is the son of Charles Manson, and I'm pretty sure he is. I'm not 100% sure if DNA tests were taken, but that's how this story goes. Thank you guys so much for watching the prison life of Charles Manson. I'll see you guys all in the next video.
Think these critters are weird? Hold on to your tinfoil hats, folks, because our next video is about to beam you straight into the Twilight Zone. Click that shiny next video button faster than you can say probe to dive into the wild world of people who claim they've been the unwilling lab rats in E.T.'s science fair. We're talking folks who swear they've had more invasive experiences than your average airport security pat-down. These unlucky guinea pigs are sporting battle scars that make crop circles look like child's play. And their stories are so out there, even their therapists need therapy. Are they spinning yarn taller than the Washington Monument? Or did they really get a front row seat to some intergalactic mischief? There's only one way to find out. So grab your salt shaker, for all those grains you'll need. Slap on your best skeptical grimace, and let's go judge some extraterrestrial shenanigans together. After all, the truth is out there. And it might just have a twisted sense of humor.